Okay, so one of the great things that we can do with Rhino is we can create objects that then become kind of guide objects. So we've created these curves, for instance, that you could use as guide objects. But you can also create these planes. So everything that is built, generally, it's a little bit easier if we can always go around and define what is X, Y, and Z relative to this complex 3D geometry. So what we can do is create a plane, and we can tell Rhino to say, we want this to be the construction plane. This is the surface. This is the X, Y coordinates that we want to start to create geometry on. Okay? So this is really handy when we're doing cross-sectional curves in complex geometry. So I'm going to let me find this here. Okay, so what we can do is go over to Surface Tools, and you'll notice that we have these rectangular planes. So I like to use this 3-point rectangular plane, and we can go up into our top view. I'm going to turn on my reference images here. And when I start to look at this, I've drawn out these things just as a way to kind of give me some visual guidelines when I'm using in perspective. Okay, at this point, I'm not going to care about that, other than to just give me some pointers in 3D space, kind of assuming where the geometry might be.
Have you tried to set them in your
Yes, I have. So if we look at them in perspective, you can see that they roughly describe the 3D shape. Now, the only reason I'm using them again is to just when I'm drawing these cross-sectional curves, I'll have some reference point as to what the height is and how far over I might need to be. But I'm also going to be looking very closely at the plan. Okay. So what we can do is I find that if I go into the top space and then I create one of these planes, I know that I'm going to have a plane that's going to run, I need to start somewhere, okay? And if I'm going to use a sweep command, I have to start. So I'm going to just basically create a plane starting here. And I'm going to make it orthogonal so it's straight. And I'm just going to put out this plane, and then I'm going to switch to my front view. And again, go orthogonal. And I'm going to make it bigger than I think I need it to be. Yes?
Are these different closed curves in different layers? Or just
Which, these ones?
yes.
Yeah, they can be closed or open curves, but I do have them onto some contour layers. And this one is not as organized just because I'm being a little bit quick. But yeah, that's the idea. Okay? Now let's see. So I want to make sure I have my filters turned on. I want to turn off my filters so I can select everything. I had filters turned on just because I wanted to select control points. So in this case, I am going to get this set, and then what we want to do is set the construction plane. So construction planes are relative to each view. So if I set the construction plane in perspective view, I can have a totally different construction plane in the left or right views. Okay, all my other different views. So you have to, sometimes when you start messing with construction planes, you have to kind of remember. And always look down here to this bottom corner so that you can get an idea of how that's actually laying out. In this case, the x and y, because it's orthogonal, is not different from the world. I just want to basically say, work on this plane, okay? And there are tools that you can do. So if we went to standard and we went to control points, if we hold that flyout, we can see that we could draw on this surface. And that could be an option, but what I've found is that when you do that and you're drawing an interpolated curve, sometimes the way it wants to generate that curve starts to be really wonky, because it's actually trying to calculate on the surface. So sometimes you end up with really crazy, hard to control curves. So that's why I prefer to work on the C-plane, creating a construction plane, a C-plane. So if you look at our this next tab is the construction planes. So this one is really helpful for us. So what we want to do is go to set the C construction plane to this object. So I'll click that, and then it's just going to ask me to select that object, and I'm going to select that. Now you'll notice that the grid is now set up over here, and if I use my project tool, it's going to start to draw a curve. So now I'm going to switch this to black just because it's a little easier to see. Okay. Now you can see that if I draw an interpolated curve, just the regular, not the one on the surface, and I'm going to turn off my object snaps. I'm going to draw right on this plane. So for the rail curve, since I know I'm going to sweep it, I'm basically going to be going from this curve here to this curve down here. And so that's where I want my start and end points. Now when you're doing a cross-sectional curve, you do need to start, those need to intersect. They need to touch one another. So at this point, what I'm going to type is end, because I want the end point of that curve. The other thing I could do though is I could type intersect, INT, and it's going to basically, come on now. Alright, we don't want to do that. Okay? So if you have a hard time doing intersect, there's a trick you can do, is you can select the geometry, select all. Oh, we want to turn off, we want to lock our reference images. And then we can type intersect. And then what it will do is create points at those intersection planes. Now, you want to be kind of careful with those in the sense that if you have your snaps turned on and everything, those can be kind of unwieldy. So if I'm going to do that, I usually use it, create the curve, and then delete the points so that they're not hanging around afterwards. Okay, so once we do this, let's start, and we want to select a point. Okay, and now I'm just going to draw in 3D space roughly what I know the plan to be, and you can see I can see the plan underneath, so I'm just guessing in 3D space right at the moment roughly where it is. And then I'm going to do the end point here. So point again. Okay. So you notice that even though I said that I was only really concerned about going to this curve, I drew the whole curve. And so what that allows me to do is to arbitrarily split this curve someplace so that I can then start and control the section. So I have some guide point in terms of tangency of what I want it to look like when I do this blend surface. So I have kind of a reference there. I just find that it's a little harder to kind of stop and then restart again. All right, so now that we've created that curve, you can see how helpful that is to create that construction plane in 3 dimensions so that we can actually just keep working in the perspective tool. Yeah.
Are those lines that could have made that's off of looking at the section?
You could, but we were only provided one section.
Yeah.
And I know that the section at that point doesn't show the 3 steps. And so, but I looked at the section to kind of figure out how it should end. So you can see that I'm taking information from there, but not totally, right? So in the perfect world, we would have actually a whole series of section plans that we could just trace, and then we could use that geometry and be real accurate. But we're just going to have to guesstimate. Okay. And the important point here is to do your best to make it look like it is, but we're not going to be completely accurate. I mean, that's not the goal. The goal is to figure out, to teach you guys how you can model weird geometry and use the tools. And by doing that, you have to use things like construction planes and set views and things like that that are really helpful when you do other stuff that's actually more mundane. Right? Okay? All right, so now that we have that section curve, I can go in and look at my top plan and kind of figure out where I want. So what you want to do is think about where things make transitions. Okay? So let me turn up the plan for a second. My computer's so old it does not like to record at the same time. So, oops. All right, so what I want to do is I know that, so I have this described, and I feel good about that. And then I know from looking at the elevations that that if we look at this, because there's some contours, that there's some concavity underneath these different places where it's kind of undercutting underneath that shelf. And I've started that on that one curve. So when I'm looking at this, where I'm going to place this next one is thinking about where I want it. And you can see I kind of drew out this guide curve thinking, okay, this is where I'm going to be going with that. So what I would do the next time, well, first of all, I would draw this other plane on the back side while we have the same construction plane there and just get that done at the same time. But I'm not going to do that just to save time. Okay, so here I can move this and I can describe this curve, but one thing that sometimes is helpful when you're doing these sweep on rails is to think about tangency. So here it's okay. This is kind of perpendicular. But if I go over here, like on this, oops. So you see this line here where it starts to drop back. Sometimes those cause some weird things because the curve is trying to navigate along that curve, and if you create a curve where it's already offset, so it's not in tangency to it, it's going to take that curve and kind of do weird railroads, and sometimes that can give pinch points or strange geometry. So when you're doing cross-sectional curves, the best practice is to try to keep them perpendicular to the rail curves. Okay, that's the best practice. That's not always the case, and having a little bit off is not going to be a big deal. But if we're looking at this point here, and that becomes a real critical point, then I might want to rotate this tool to be perpendicular to that. But use that on a case-by-case basis. So for right now, what I'm going to do is rotate it this way because I really want to focus in on this kind of transition area between the two of them, where we go from 3 steps down to 2 steps. And so I'm going to be kind of wanting to control that transition a little bit. Really accurately, my first control position would be up here where it's starting to make that transition. And then the next cross-sectional curve would be down here in this transition. So that way I can, anytime I have some complex where I really want to control how the geometry is changing in tight ways, you want to add detail. So that means adding cross-sectional curves. Okay? So just broadly thinking about that strategy, then the next kind of crucial point here would be at the end, the start and end of this condition. Right? So one there, and then another one here. And then the other one crucial is around this corner. So I would probably want to make another kind of cross-sectional curve like here. So that starts to describe this shape, and maybe a little bit more, maybe not quite as radical, like there. And then the door is the other kind of critical part, right? Yeah. I guess I'm not quite understanding what you're asking. Pivoting this in the z direction? Yeah. Yeah, so when I think about the construction plane, I'm actually not really, I don't really care about the geometry. All I want to do is make sure that I have enough like working surface to draw on. But actually, like, I don't care about this part. All I'm looking at is the construction plane right through here, because that's where I'm focusing on where the section is. And so there's going to be some places here where you would want to think about those kind of things when you're drawing both sections, when it's going through the whole object, right? And you're trying to do both at the same time. But here, this is some detail area where I'm just going to draw the one section for the front as it takes around the corner. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, exactly. And so as I do this one, then I would rotate again, because the door is the next kind of critical point, because this is where we want kind of a straight surface for the door to align to. So, and then this is again where, now that I know where the door is, I would maybe be a little bit more careful about getting it parallel to the door frame. But then I would draw this curve and this start of this curve over here on the same plane. That way I have basically snapping points when I want to add the next geometry. I have a group of geometry there that I can snap to. Okay? So do that for this one. You go around and just think about that same process. You will already have probably 2 or 3 already kind of generated. So really all you have to do is probably think about this transition here, making that description. And then jump over and do these things. And again, the other thing that I found helpful is to make sure that your geometry, that you kind of sort the geometry, because sometimes it could get really messy like spaghetti, and you're going what am I looking at and what am I really seeing. The other thing that's really helpful too is that you can create this geometry, for instance. I'm going to look at it on the front, and then I can actually draw some. So what I'm going to do here, let's just do this right. So I have, come on. All right. I'm going to be in this front view. And what I'm going to do is create a construction plane here. So now it's on the construction plane. And I can draw reference lines for like where these things are going to happen in elevation wise. And then you can group that together. Oh, it didn't draw. Come on. Oh, maybe it did draw. So there's two ways you can do this. You can group it, or sometimes it might be better to just split the geometry right there so that you have a line. And that can be then used as a reference plane as you move this thing around. You always have these elevation lines to guide you. So and that doesn't change any of the functionality. Okay, so is that kind of clear how you do that? You just move around, and I get it set in plan view. Okay, in the top view, I get them set, and then I move into the perspective, tell it to orient the construction plane, and then I draw in perspective. Okay, and turn off your object snaps when you're doing that, and just snap to the intersections. Okay, and then that way you can really control what it's going to look like in section, and you have a conception of the overall form. And then once we get that together, we can sweep those pieces. So I'm just going to draw some quick geometry over here just to let's do this. Select these points. Okay. So let's say that I have this one here, and I'm just going to do the sweep command just to show you what it's like. Turn off these reference images for a second. So we have a cross-sectional curve, and we have a rail curve. Okay, this is basically what we want. Now, I find that doing this, I close this for another purpose, but I actually don't want these things to be closed. The rail curves being closed will create a closed object, but sometimes you can run into problems, and we're going to cut all this stuff off anyway in the back, so it doesn't need to have that. So what I'm going to do is use the split command, select this object, and then I'm going to choose point and type P, and I am just going to click there, hit enter. I'm moving too fast for my slow computer. You could also explode it if you were clean. Okay. So if we sweep the first one, just sweep one rail. Let's sweep one. We'll select the bottom as the rail edge. That's what we wanted to kind of traverse. And then we'll select the cross-sectional curves. And you can see how it's taken that shape and literally just swept it around this whole thing. Now you can see the problem with that is that because I don't have any other geometry changing that cross-section, it causes weirdness, right in here. Okay, so that's why you draw those multiple cross-sectional curves, because what it's going to do is morph from one curve to the next as it goes along that curve. You have to tell it in that process, like we just did. We would tell it, okay, use this, select the first rail, and then you select all of the cross-sectional curves as it goes around. And then it will look at all of those and morph between those. Okay. The important thing to remember is that those cross-sectional curves always have to touch the rail curves. They have to be touching. So use the intersect to get those curves together and make those cross-sectional pieces. Okay, and then it's a really powerful piece. Okay, so then let's cancel out of that. And let's yeah, I'm just, that's exactly, I'm going to use the top and the bottom. So there are certain ones of those that that are important. So where I think about where I'm going to cut that geometry, like here, this is where I think, actually, probably back here, I'm going to draw a curve on this transition that describes that, and that will be my top rail. Okay, so let's just say that that is where I'm going to cut it. Okay, so that's going to be my top rail for the first one. This will be my bottom rail. And then this section between here and here is going to be my cross-sectional curve. Because then I'll sweep that piece and it'll go around. And then I can create this upper piece separately. And again, thinking about if I use rail or if I want to, I mean, you could use a patch on this one, for instance, and then cut out the holes where you want it to be the rail. And then what we're going to do is once we have this surface and then we have this surface, we're going to use a tool called BlendSurface, which I'm going to show you next, so that it'll seamlessly blend those two surfaces together. Okay? So let's so now you can see how my construction plane is all ski-wampus. See what it did? Drew it in a weird place. So we can go to set, and then let's see, we can also do it through here. Go down to construction plane, and then we can do world, okay? Or we can do origin and type 0, 0, 0. Okay. It's a good question. I don't know that. I've never done that. So it might be. Yeah, it looks like you can. Previous, next seaplane, previous seaplane. Looks like you can do some of that. Okay, so let's see. Go to the top. So set my construction plane to world top. And then I'm going to draw just over here. Come on. And then, let's see, I want to rebuild this surface. You don't have to worry about this, but so sometimes, so this is a flat plane, but sometimes you want to be able to modify this plane. So we can add control points to the plane, and then using our control point editor, we can go around and select these points, and I can just move them up. So that would be another way you could, if you were like wanted to be a sculptor, right? You could create a plane that has some holes, and then you can just kind of sculpt it to fit that space. But I think that would be maybe more tedious than making cross-sectional curves, actually. Yeah, it would be a tedious, but that's not a bad thing if you're just thinking diagrammatically about a surface and wanted to create just a simple surface. You could do it like that. Okay, so I have these two surfaces here, and they're at different elevations. Okay. And then we can go into the surface tools. And what we want to do is look at this one here where we want to blend this surface. Okay, so when it's going to ask you to select the first edge, so that's going to be that edge, and then enter. And you can have multiple edges that you want to blend. And then I want this one for the second edge. Okay, and what you're going to see is that it's going to give you some options on how those surfaces start to get blended together. Okay, so I mean the idea is that you could just sweep those single line sections around the bottom, like each one, and then just blend between the two. So I mean you could break it up into even more discrete elements, but you have some options here about how it's going to calculate. You know, like here is just position, that's a straight. Tangency, it's going to try to keep these things tangent, which is probably a good one, right? But then you can also go in here and edit these things, so you can control how this blend works between the surface for each one of them. Okay? And then once you're happy with how it's turning out, then you just click OK. And now you have these surfaces that are all seamlessly blend together. And if we want, we can select all of those surfaces. Okay, come on. And join those into one poly surface, so it's all selected at once. Okay? So that would be my technique. So that's what I want you guys to work on. Work on the C-planes, building out those profiles, sweeping into sections, and you know, maybe work in little smaller points, but think about how you would break up this surface so that you could use this blend tool to really just make it easier for you to build up that surface in chunks. Okay? All right, so that's it, and just get to work for the rest of the session.